Joanna Cherry says she has been cancelled for holding gender-critical views. This comes after Edinburgh's Stand Comedy Club called off an event she was due to appear at because a number of its staff were unwilling to work at the gig. The SNP MP has been outspoken against the Scottish Government's Gender Recognition Reform Bill, which was passed by MSPs last year. Some who disagree with her claim her views are transphobic. Ms Cherry spoke to Scotland Tonight about her views, freedom of speech, and offered her reaction to the cancellation of her event.
I think it's completely unreasonable. They invited me to do this event in full knowledge that I'm someone who, as part of my political career, has been outspoken in support of women's rights and lesbian rights. So they knew that before they engaged me to do this event. And it does seem rather unreasonable that staff can have an event cancelled because they don't agree with my views on lesbian and women's rights.
But don't they have a right to do that?
Well, no, they don't actually. I have a right not to be discriminated against on the basis of my philosophical beliefs or indeed my sexuality. If they were cancelling me because I was a Catholic, then I think people would universally accept that, but that was unacceptable. They're cancelling the event because the staff don't like my views as a lesbian and a feminist, and I think that is, as well as being unlawful, it's unacceptable, and it's really not in the spirit of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe.
So what can be done? Can they be forced to do that? Can they be forced to work, or how would this? What's the alternative, do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm hoping that this can be sorted out. It's 3 months till the festival starts. The Stand invited me in the first place. I'm hoping that perhaps I could speak with them or their staff privately and reassure them that they're wrong about my views. I mean, for all I know, some of the staff may have come under pressure because they wrongly think that I'm transphobic, whereas I've never said anything transphobic. I support equal rights for trans people. What I don't agree with is that any man has the right to identify as a woman without any safeguards. But
of course, the trans community would say that is transphobic.
Well, not all the trans community would say that is transphobic. I've got friends in the trans community who agree with my views on these matters. So there is no legal right recognised in the United Kingdom or by the European Court of Human Rights to self-ID. There is a right not to be discriminated against because you're trans. There's also a right not to be discriminated against because of your beliefs or because you're a lesbian. And I think I'm being discriminated against because I believe that lesbians are same-sex attracted women, and because I oppose self-ID because I think it's a threat to the dignity, privacy and safety of women. So
will you take legal action against the Stand and its owners?
I'm not, because I would hope that, well, I mean, I'm a public figure and I've got a bit of power as a politician. It's quite difficult to get rid of me unless my constituents decide to do that, and of course that is their right. So I think it's my responsibility to take a stand against this anti-free speech and discriminatory action on behalf of all the women who have less power than me and are facing similar discrimination. But as I say, I'd like to hope that this can be sorted out, and it would help if more politicians and more people in public life had the courage to speak out against this sort of thing, because it's going to keep happening.
You've spoken about MP support from fellow politicians. The GRR legislation, of course, was passed by a majority in the Scottish Parliament. And are you not kind of out of step with your fellow politicians?
No, I'm not out of step with the country. I think opinion polls have shown that the public are very uneasy about self-identification. I think it's the politicians who are out of step with the public, and I think the bill was passed without full and proper consideration of the balance of rights. There's an awful lot said about trans rights, very little said about women's rights or LGBT rights.
But nonetheless, it was passed. Nonetheless, it was passed. Do you think all MSPs in particular were supportive of this, your SNP colleagues?
Well, many of my SNP colleagues, of course, rebelled at Holyrood, and I know there were others who were very unhappy about the legislation but didn't want to rebel or didn't have the courage to do so. Likewise, many of my colleagues at Westminster sympathise with my views and agree with them, but they're afraid to speak out.
So why is that? What's the culture that causes that?
Sorry?
Why is that? What is the culture that causes that?
Well, the culture that causes that is that any person, particularly women, who have the courage to question gender identity ideology and self-identification are monstered as transphobes and find themselves sidelined. Ever since I've spoken out about these issues in the SNP, the trajectory of my political career has changed greatly, and I've faced some very unpleasant scenes, some significant unpleasantness behind the scenes in my political party, and some of it's come into the public domain. It's on the record that a member of the party threatened to rape me and was convicted of that. I'm going to court again in the summer to give evidence against a trans rights activist who threatened to kill me. So I think leading figures in Scottish politics have allowed this climate of fear and repression against lesbians and feminists like myself.
And who are these people? Who's responsible for that culture?
Well, I think people in my own party, people in the Green Party, people in the Labour Party and people in the Lib Dems. Tories have got a bit of a better record in this. It pains me to say that because I'm very much a politician of the left. But, you know, freedom of speech shouldn't be the preserve of the right. It should be defended by everyone in politics. And as I say, you don't have to look very far to see examples of politicians in leading roles at Holyrood who have wrongly called people like me transphobic simply because we don't support gender identity ideology.
And what about the former leadership of the SNP? Have they been part of this?
Well, I mean, everyone knows that Nicola Sturgeon said that women like me's views were invalid and called us transphobes and homophobes, which seemed very ludicrous to me as I'm a lesbian who's been out since the 80s, so calling me homophobic is a bit ridiculous. Going
back to the issue of the day and being cancelled by the Stand and this entire debate around trans rights, which has become quite toxic, how do you see this ending? What's the full stop?
Well, when I first became involved in questioning the wisdom of a system of self-identification, a trans woman constituent came to see me at my constituency surgery, and after talking around the issues, we decided to write jointly to the Scottish Government to suggest that there should be a citizens' assembly on the issue of how the Gender Recognition Act should be reformed, at which all voices could be heard and the evidence properly evaluated. And our suggestion wasn't taken up, and I don't think we've ever had that process in Scotland. I think the committee that considered the matter at Holyrood was very one-sided in its consideration and didn't listen properly to, and wasn't actually even afforded proper evidence about the human rights implications of self-identification. So, I mean, I don't hold any candle for the Tory Unionist government in Westminster blocking the bill. But I do think the bill is deeply problematic, and I would like to see it and the debate around it addressed in Scotland by the sort of civilised, evidence-based approach that could be afforded by a citizens' assembly.
Joanna Cherry, thanks for joining us in Scotland tonight.
Thank you.